Hey everybody, it's Matt. Welcome back to the Journey Church podcast. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can automatically get our weekly episodes. And you might want to go ahead and subscribe to our Journey YouTube channel as well. You'll find messages, music, interviews, inspiring stories, and more for you all right there. Now, I hope this episode helps you take your next step in following Jesus.
Today we are wrapping up our series we've been in for the last 3 weeks. The series is called Happy Together Forever. And what we've been talking about is 3 counterintuitive principles that if you're married, you can apply in your marriage. If you're not married, but you hope to be married one day, you want to be married one day or married again, at some point. Well, these are principles, and this is what I love about it. These are principles you can begin applying now, skills you can develop now, so that when you do get married or get married again, you can stay in love, happy together forever. And for those of you who are like, I am done with marriage, I don't want anything to do with that, that's fine. You can apply these to any relationship in your life. I'll give you a quick review before we get rolling. For those of you who haven't been tracking with us through the series, week 1, we talked about the principle of you have to make marriage a submission competition. In other words, at the heart of every great marriage is this idea of mutual submission. It's when 2 people come together and say, to the best of my ability, because none of us are perfect, but to the best of my ability, I'm going to put you before me, you before me. I'm going to honor you before myself. And when 2 people are willing to do that, that is the foundation for all great marriages. It's what enables 2 people to build a relationship that's built on mutual respect, mutual trust, and mutual love. And then last week, we talked about the second principle, which is to make love a verb. And all I meant by that was this. You meet these couples that have been married for 50 years, some of them for 60 years, and they're so in love. You look at them and go, well, there's a relationship goal. I hope one day that I end up in the kind of relationship they have. Well, when you talk to them, what you find is somewhere along the way, part of the reason the relationship is what it is because somewhere along the way they discovered, oh, wait a minute, love is not a noun. In other words, it's not something that just happens to me. I fall into love and I fell out of love and had really no control over it. They don't think of love that way. They think of love as a verb, as a choice, as an action, as something they get to do. They get to choose to demonstrate patience and kindness and selflessness and self-control and on and on and on. I get to choose not to smuggle bad things into the relationship, but instead to elevate the truth and what's good in a relationship. They realize that was in their control. And when you realize that, it begins to change the nature of your relationship because now it's not something that, well, either I have it or I don't. Now it's something you can always choose and you can always develop. But that leads us to the thing I left you with last week if you were here, which is, okay, that's great. But to have a great relationship, doesn't it take 2 people doing that? Like mutual submission requires 2 people. And if you're going to choose to love, well, 2 people need to choose to love. And the danger and the fear, and I understand this, the fear is, all right, well, if I choose to do these things, but they don't choose to do these things, oh my gosh, what's going to happen then? I'm going to be taken advantage of, or, things aren't going to end up working out, and I'm going to end up at the short end of the stick, So one of the things that all of us who have been in relationships of any kind, one of the thoughts that's always crossed our mind is, well, at some point we thought, how do I help them change? You've thought that, haven't you? It's like, okay, I know I need to work on me some, but how do I help them change? Because after all, when you look at the blame pie, I'll own I've contributed to the problems in this relationship. About 10% of the pie is mine and about 90% is theirs. That's how we tend to view it. So it's okay if I'm going to work on me, but they need to do something with them. Well, today, we're going to talk about how you can help them change. But before we get there, the thing you have to understand, the reason why relationships get in a place where they need to change is because all of us bring baggage into our relationships. Everybody does. Everybody does. Past hurt, past pain, past guilt, past trust issues. We could go on and on. Everybody, when they go into a relationship, they bring baggage with them. When I'm doing premarital counseling, I'm terrible at it because I pretty much ruin the whole experience. I say, hey guys, I just want you to imagine, well, on your wedding day, groom, as you're, coming out, getting ready, bride, I just want you to envision a big, long trail of baggage behind him. And then groom, when you see bride coming down the aisle, she's toting a big, long, line of baggage behind her. And it's just like, well, our day's not even special anymore. That's why I'm no good at it, But that's the reality of what's happening. Next time you're at a wedding and you're in the crowd, just imagine that, okay? It'll keep things interesting for you. Because that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. No, nobody gets to the altar and says, I do, and all their baggage disappears. The problem is the baggage is invisible, and most of us don't even know we're carrying it and we're dragging it along, much less the other person in the relationship. They can't see it either. And so it creates all these barriers, all these issues. Baggage, at best, will create barriers in the relationship that prevent intimacy, that create obstacles to vulnerability, which is why we've had this experience, which is why you have been in relationships before and you thought, I don't know what the deal is, but it's like we're always running into something. We just can't get where we want to get in the relationship. What you're running into is baggage. That's what you run into. But you probably don't know it's there, and the other person probably doesn't know it's there, and so you can't deal with it. But it's still there, and it's still having an impact. And at worst, and a lot of you have experienced this, at worst, baggage breaks relationships. At worst, baggage just ends relationships, and this happens all the time. And we assume that, it was all them. What we don't know is it was the baggage that was brought in, as much ours as theirs, that ended up ending the relationship. So, today we want to talk about how do you address that baggage, and what can you do to help the other person in the relationship see and identify and ultimately address their baggage, not just yours. So researchers have spent a lot of time studying this, and one of the things that they have found is that every single person as they're growing up has 10 primary emotional needs. And the researchers have said that in order for someone to grow up and to reach adulthood and have the capacity and the ability to have healthy relationships, they need to have all 10 of these emotional needs met. In other words, growing up, for you to be fully equipped to have great, healthy, stay in love, happy together forever relationships, you need to have experienced huge doses of these 10 things: respect, comfort, security, support, encouragement, acceptance, approval, appreciation, attention, and affection. That's it. As long as you got all 10 of those things, you are good to go. To which I read the list and think, well, that sounds impossible. You know, who got all of that when they were growing up? I want you to think of them, and this is why this is here. I want you to think of them like tanks in your heart, okay? So you got 10 different tanks in your heart. And growing up, there are a lot of things that transpire over the course of your life that tend to sometimes add to, and fill up the tank some. But a lot of times, the things you and I experience deplete the tanks, deplete these emotional needs. And if you think about it, when you come into a marriage relationship, or one day if you get into a marriage relationship, what's happening is, this is a lot of the baggage. What's happening is you are coming into that relationship with tanks that are somewhat depleted, with tanks that aren't fully filled, okay? But you don't realize that. Now, if you're the exception to the rule, and you had parents, no parents perfect, but if you had parents that were just amazing and these tanks were pretty close to full, well, that's wonderful. That's great news. But the bad news is you're probably marrying somebody who doesn't have tanks that are full, right? Because it's very hard to find two people who had that incredible experience growing up. So you come into a relationship and you got all this stuff going on. And as human beings, this is just human nature. As human beings, we're always looking to have these needs met. We're always looking to get our respect tank full, to get our comfort and security tank full, to get our attention tank full, to get our approval tank full, to get our acceptance tank full. Well, we always want that. We can't help but crave that. But you're like me, you grew up in situations where your experiences didn't always fill these tanks. For some of you, you grew up with a dad who worked so much, he wasn't home a lot, and as a result of that, you missed out on some attention, you missed out on some approval, you missed out on some acceptance, some affirmation maybe. You grew up where dad had a hobby and he was always busy with that, and it sent the message to you. You may not have even meant to, but it was like, this is more important than you are. And that depleted your tanks a little bit. Or you grew up with a mom and there were, same thing as like she wasn't meant to be, but she just always seemed so critical, so it depleted your approval tank. Or it seemed like she wasn't always there for you when you needed her to be there, so it depleted your security tank, and on and on and on. She wasn't encouraging. She was always saying, just suck it up. She wasn't encouraging, so it depleted your encouragement tank. We can talk about this all day. And maybe you grew up in a home where there were alcohol issues, there were drug issues, there were money issues, and all of that got mixed in and depleted it. And even if your parents were great, if you had siblings, well, that's enough about that. If you had siblings, you know what happened, right? It's like y'all were not kind and loving to each other all the time. So these tanks got depleted because of things happened with your siblings. And then you got older and you started dating, or maybe you got married, you had exes, and the exes depleted some of these tanks because they treated you like you weren't valuable enough, worthy enough, smart enough, whatever the case may have been. And so the thing you have to realize is, as you moved into the relationship you're in now, if you're in one, or the marriage you're in now, or as you one day move into your next relationship, you're coming in with tanks that look like this. Now, for those of us who are married, the thing you have to understand is one of the reasons you are attracted to the person you're married to is because it felt to you like they were great at filling up these tanks. It's part of why you love them, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's because they treated you in such a way that it helped to refill some of the things that happen. But here's the problem. What we end up doing is we end up expecting our spouse to be responsible to keep all of these tanks full. And that's a burden that no individual can carry. And so as you get into a marriage relationship and you go on, time after time, day after day, whatever the case may be, you find yourself in this marriage relationship where over time, sometimes intentionally, but let's be honest, a lot of times it's very unintentional, your spouse does something that depletes a tank. And you get so angry. You get so upset. You get so furious. If you're, somebody who expresses your anger, or on the other side, you know who you are, you get passive aggressive. We talk about that, but you know how that works. You get super passive aggressive. And you don't know why. You think it's because of what they did, and you're thinking, well, if you just stop, or if you just change, or I can't believe you. And what you don't realize is they may not have even meant it like that, but they may have said something or done something that reminded you of something that happened in your past. It's something a sibling did, a parent did, an ex did. And all of a sudden when that, in your past, it robbed you of security. So now when they rattle this tank a little bit, oh my goodness, all of that comes flooding right back. And you get so upset over it. You get so frustrated by it. And it creates tension. It creates conflict in your current relationship. But your spouse is often on the other side going, I don't know what I did to elicit or to warrant that big of a response out of you, because they don't see the tanks and they don't realize what's happened. But the thing I want you to understand is that we all have a tendency to blame the people closest to us for what is happening in us. Let me say that again. We all tend to blame the people closest to us for what's happening inside of us. But what's happening inside of us often has very little to do with the people around us. So the question that I want to talk about today is, well, how do you address this? How do you address this? This tank right here starts getting low, this tank's low. Well, what do you do about this? How do you even know what's going on inside of your heart? King Solomon, maybe some of you are familiar with him. King Solomon was wisest man who lived in his generation, one of the wisest people who ever lived. He wrote a lot of wisdom. And part of the reason he wrote so much wisdom literature is because he wanted to pass it down to his children to help them understand how to live a better life, to help them understand how to have better relationships. And Solomon made a statement that I find interesting, that honestly, the way he worded it, I find somewhat striking. He made a statement and gave some advice in one of these writings to his kids about this very thing that we're talking about. So I want to read it to you. There's only one verse today, okay? That's it. That's it. You're going, are we getting out early? I don't know. We'll see. But there's only one verse today, okay? But I want to show you what he said, because he gives us a path, he gives us a solution on how to understand what's going on inside of you and inside of me. So here's what he wrote in Proverbs. He said, above all else. Now remember, he'd written tons of wisdom literature. So his kids are reading this and he's going, okay, I gave you a ton of advice, but I want you to take this advice straight to the top. It is that important. Above all else, guard your heart. Well, that's unique terminology, isn't it? That's an unusual phrase. Guard your heart. What's that even mean? Can you imagine, just think about this. Imagine I come up to you today and I looked at you and said, hey, I have a question for you. What's your plan to guard your heart? If you were transparent, you would look back at me and say, I have a question for you. Why do you ask such stupid questions? Like, what does that even mean? Nobody talks this way, do we? We see each other and we say, how's the family? How's work? How's school? How's your health? If you've had some health issues, we talk about all that. But imagine how you would respond if tomorrow, wherever you were, somebody walked in, looked over at you and said, hey, how you doing to guarding your heart? You'd be like, that's weird. I don't know what to do about that, because nobody's ever taught us to think this way about our heart. You know what we've been taught to do? Not guard our hearts. We've been taught to monitor our behavior. And then for those of us who are married, we have become very skilled at monitoring our spouse's behavior. That's what we do. We monitor their behavior. And the whole reason that we tend to monitor our spouse's behavior is because whenever our spouse does something that begins to deplete one of these tanks, we want them to change their behavior because we're looking to them to be the source to fill it back up. This is why you've had some of the fights you've had. It's why you've had some of the conversations you've had. And you didn't realize exactly what was going on, but there were some tanks depleted in your heart. And you were thinking, okay, I need you to never do that again because it really rattled and depleted this tank. I need you to never say that again because it really rattled and depleted this tank. I need you to do things differently, but your spouse doesn't have the context of what's going on because they can't see your heart. They can't see these tanks. Often you don't know what's happening. And so it just looks like you're being controlling. Like, why do you keep telling me what to do? Why do you keep telling me to start this and stop this? I can't ever make you happy, And you're like, well, you don't know how to say it. But what's happening is you're just trying to control them so they will help you have your emotional needs met. And as I said, it's a burden that they simply cannot fully fulfill. The reality is that staying in love, happy together forever, that kind of relationship has more to do with the health of your heart than it does the behavior of your partner, the behavior of your spouse. To stay in love, happy together forever has way more to do with the health of your heart than the behavior of your spouse. This is what Solomon believed, which is why he said, okay, and we'll talk about what this means in a minute. He said, all right, you've got to learn how to guard, protect, defend, monitor your own heart. Why, Solomon? He says, for everything you do flows from it. Everything. Don't miss that. According to Solomon's perspective, according to his point of view, every thought you have, every feeling you feel, every action you take is driven by what's going on in your heart. Now, this explains a lot. This explains the soundtracks that play in our minds. This explains why some of you're always in your mind, the explanation or the reason for why things happen or they did this or they said that, it's always negative. This is why you're always going, nothing ever works out for me. This is why you're always going, they're always out to get me. They don't seem to love me. They never seem to care about the fact they hurt me. This is why so many of those soundtracks run in your mind because, well, your emotional needs haven't been met, your tanks are not full, and you're desperate for that. And so you interpret everything that anybody around you does based on, are they helping the problem or hurting the problem? And so they do things that seem innocent to them, but to you it's like, no, you're hurting the problem. So what's happening in you, everything's flowing out of your heart and it's changing the way you think. It's changing the way you feel. Ultimately, it changes your actions and what you do. So according to Solomon, if you're going to have healthy relationships, you shouldn't start by figuring out, well, what kind of routine should we have? And, let's talk about how to talk about conflict in a good way, although all of that's fine. He says, no, if you want to have a healthy relationship, you better start with your heart. You cannot have a healthy relationship if you do not have a healthy heart. So, the third counterintuitive principle that you have to understand if you want to stay in love, happy together forever, is you have to make change your choice. Make change your choice. In other words, we have to stop pointing the finger and assuming the issue is all the people around us. And we have to look inside. Because what is in you, don't miss this, what is in you will come out of you no matter what you do. It will. What is in you will come out of you no matter who is with you. So you can get out of that relationship, you can change the names, you can change the faces, you can change the spouses. But you're bringing these depleted tanks with you into the next relationship and the next one and the next one. And if you don't figure out how to address it, history will repeat itself over and over and over again. At some point, you have to make change your choice. You have to look in the mirror and go, I've got to figure out how to guard my heart, how to address the stuff rattling around inside of me. I got to figure out what to do with these emotional needs that are not being met. Needs that God created you to have. So they're not bad, but you got to figure out how to address those if you ever want to have a healthy relationship. It has to start with a healthy heart. Now, if you're sitting there going, Well, there you go again. You just, put all the burden on me and you didn't say anything about them. But if you knew what they were like, I get all that. Let me tell you why this is the secret to changing the person you're with. You cannot love anyone well if you have an unhealthy heart. Think about it. You can't love anyone well because you can't give what you don't have. And so until you figure out this heart issue inside of you, it will limit your ability to love. But if you could address what's going on in your heart, if you could figure out how to have these emotional needs met and be aware of what's happening when they get dinged, you're going to be able to love better. And the better you love, the more accepting you are. Now track with me. Every human on the planet is drawn towards environments of acceptance. Okay? We all want to be in relationships where we feel fully accepted. And you know what happens when you feel fully accepted by somebody? You swing the door wide open for them to influence you. Now, some of you did this in school because you had a teacher that proved over and over that they cared about you and that they accepted you. And what did you do as a result? You were wide open to their influence. They would sit you down and say, hey, you need to think about this. In some cases, hey, I think you need to change this. Hey, I think you're headed down a wrong path. And that didn't tick you off because you knew they cared about you and they loved you so much. You were open to hear whatever they had to say. You were open to their influence. Now, you had other teachers who you didn't feel that way. And so they could tell you whatever they wanted to tell you and you would blow it off. Same thing was true with coaches. You've had the same thing true with bosses. I mean, on and on we could go. Whenever somebody you know they love and accept you fully, they have huge influence in your life. So, if you're in a marriage relationship and you're able to get your heart healthy enough that you can love with that kind of acceptance your spouse, I don't care how difficult he is, I don't care how far she's got to come, I don't care how much they're contributing to the blame pie. If you can get your heart healthy enough that you can love your spouse that way, and they begin to feel unconditionally accepted by you, what's going to happen? They cannot help but swing the door open to your influence. And the minute they do, the two of you drop the barriers. The minute they do, the two of you stop going, well, I can't put them before me because they're going to take advantage of me. Well, if I'm always that loving to them, they'll, no, they won't do that in return. I'll get hurt. No, you put all of that aside. You put all of that aside. And what will happen is over time, they will begin to change. They'll change because they are in a relationship marked by love and unconditional acceptance. That's how you change your spouse. But you can't get there if you don't start by changing and dealing with you. So, that leads us to the question, all right, how do you guard your heart? This is all good, Matt, but how do you fill these up? What do you do here? Well, I want to give you two things, okay? First thing I want to tell you is this. Whenever you find yourself in a relationship, and we'll just talk about marriage, whenever you find yourself in a marriage where a conflict arises, a conflict exists, where they do something or say something or act in a way that, makes you angry, makes you upset, really bothers you, causes you to want to withdraw, to pull away. All right, what typically happens is we respond with saying something and we respond with doing something that just adds fuel to the fire, and y'all know that cycle, right? He goes from bad to worse, from bad to worse, from bad to worse, and we feed off each other. If you want to learn how to guard your heart, what you have to do is whenever your spouse does or says something that triggers this, you got to be able, and you can practice this week, you got to be able to pause. Do not react, but intentionally pause and take all the time you need before you say something to figure out, why am I feeling the emotions I'm feeling? What's going on inside of me? Figure out, is what they just did, am I upset because it depleted my security tank? Am I upset because it depleted my approval tank, my attention tank, my affirmation, whatever it is, my encouragement tank? You need to figure out, because they will have hit on one of these. You need to figure out what that is. Now, you may need to go to counseling. In all seriousness, you may need to go to counseling to develop the tools to be able to do this, because most of us did not grow up in homes where we were taught how to pay attention to all this stuff. So you may need somebody to help you figure this out. But once you figure it out, every time something happens, don't react. Have enough discipline to pause and to figure out, why am I feeling this way? And maybe it's warranted. Maybe they did it on purpose. But maybe they did it on accident and they didn't realize what tank they were hitting. But you figure it out. And then, once you've identified it, you go to them and you say, hey, what you said, what you did, it really hurt me. But I've realized the reason it hurt me is because it made me feel disrespected. Or I didn't feel like you were doing anything to show me comfort in a difficult situation. It hurt me because it made me feel insecure. It took away some of my security in this relationship. Now, if you're on the other side of that conversation, if your spouse comes to you and they tell you that, let me tell you how to respond. You respond by saying, thank you so much for sharing that. That was not my intent. How can I help? That's all you do. I'll tell you what you shouldn't say. Well, that's the dumbest thing in the world. You shouldn't feel that way. I didn't mean to do that. What are you thinking? Are you crazy? Like that was that. How did you get that out of that? I'm going to recommend you don't say those things. Don't ask me how I know that. I'm not going to tell you. But I'd recommend you not do it. It's much better and it's much harder. But it's much better just to say, thank you so much for sharing that. How can I help? That's all you got to do. Now, that being said, here's what I want to make clear. There is no person on the planet, your spouse included, as amazing as they are if you're married, or your future spouse if you're not married, there's no person on the planet who has the capability of keeping your 10 emotional tanks full. And if you put that burden on them, it will break your relationship. Which is why the second thing I would tell you to do, if you want to learn how to monitor and guard your heart, is you need to figure out the source that's going to meet all of your emotional needs. If you're not a Christian, you figure this out on your own. But I don't think anyone can meet these in your soul except the one who created your soul. But I'm telling you, if you would explore and come to understand how Jesus sees you, if you could begin to see yourself from his point of view, if you were able to embrace and internalize how he views you, how much he loves you, how valuable he thinks you are, if you were able to experience a relationship with him that is personal, let me tell you what will happen. All 10 of these tanks will be full. Because if you know your heavenly Father values you that much, then you're not worried about this because you know he's always there to comfort you. You're not worried about this. You know he's always going to be there, so you have ultimate security. You're not worried about finding encouragement. You're not worried about approval or acceptance because you're experiencing all of that from the one who created you. And then every now and then, other people fill these up for you too, and that's wonderful. But also every now and then, other people say and do things that deplete it. And if you will learn to stop looking to them, you got to make an apology or do something for me that's going to fill this back up because that's what you took from me. They can't do that. But if instead you will turn to your heavenly Father and go, okay, they took away some of my security, but I want you to remind me, God, how you feel about me. I want you to remind, you promised to always be there. You're never going to leave me. There's nothing you can do that's going to cause me to wonder if you're on my side. Okay, you just fill my security tank right back up. I don't have to have them do it. I'll let you. This is how you develop a healthy heart. You let the one who created you with all of these needs meet these needs for you. Now, if you don't see yourself the way God sees you, if you don't have that kind of relationship, or if you're uncertain about how he feels about you, it's not going to help this. But when you see the reality of the value and the worth that he shows you, well, it changes everything. How do you know how valuable something is? You know by how much someone's willing to pay for it, and you know by who is willing to pay for it. Well, Jesus showed up on this earth because he cared about you and me so much. He lived and he died and he rose again. He gave his life. Said, that's how much I'm willing to pay to have a relationship with you. When you come to internalize and understand that, it meets all these needs. And yeah, other people may ding them. he'll fill it back up. Other people may contribute at times. When they're loving you the way Jesus has loved them, it fills it up. But you don't have to rely on anybody else, including your spouse, to do it. So you want to stay in love, happy together forever kind of relationship. You got to develop the skill of mutual submission. You got to make marriage a submission competition. You got to develop the skill of making love a verb, of choosing actions that are loving, not assuming they're going to come and go based on feelings. And you have to make change your choice. You got to be willing to pay attention to, monitor what's going on in your heart, and develop a relationship with your Heavenly Father that is so personal, that is so strong, that you look to Him as the source to meet your needs, and not solely the person on the other side of you. When you're healthy, you know how to love. When you experience this from God, you can then give it to other people. And when you're able to do that, you then have the ability to stay in love, happy together forever. So as we wrap up, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, if this is something new to you, you never really thought about, I got to guard my heart, I got to monitor it, I got to pay attention to what's going on in there. Well, maybe this is your next step. But I want to invite you as we close to ask God to participate in that with you, to ask Jesus to help you to identify and understand where your tanks are, but also to help you look to Him as a source to fill them up. So would you pray with me? Father, a few of us honestly have ever been taught how to do this, so it's extremely difficult to figure out. We often just react to what's going on, and we never know what's at the root driving our reactions. So would you give us the wisdom, the clarity, the insight this week as we find these tanks bumped and spilled and depleted, and we start to respond. Give us the wisdom and the discipline to be able to pause. Help us to have enough clarity to see what's really going on inside of us. And would you give us the courage to look to you as the source for everything that we need? Would you give us the courage to look in the mirror and say, I got to deal with what's going on in me before I deal with what's happening around me? It's a lot easier to blame, but help us to make change our choice. And Jesus, thank you for dying, for rising again, for proving to us how much you care about us. Would you help us to come to understand and see ourselves the way you see us? Because when we experience and embrace that love from you, that acceptance from you, we can then give it to the people around us and have the relationships we most want to have. It's in your name we pray.
Hey, if you'd like more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our Journey app to access all of our recent message content. And our app is the easiest way to share this content with a friend. For more information on our church or to find our app or our YouTube channel, just visit journeycalway.com. That's journeycalway.com. Thanks for listening.